How could something so ordinary feel so different? Claire Matthews had long accepted the quiet rhythm of her life. Her little house at the end of Maple Street was always neat, always silent, and always a little too still. Every morning she made her coffee the same way. Every evening she sat by the window with her laptop, editing articles that never truly meant much to her. People in the neighborhood waved when they saw her, but no one ever stayed long enough to talk. She'd grown used to it, the solitude, the soft hum of an empty home, until the Millers moved in next door. They were a lively family, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and constant laughter spilling out of their windows. The father worked late shifts, the mother was always in a hurry, and their eldest son, Ethan, often sat on the porch with a book or headphones. Claire noticed him the first week they arrived. There was something quiet about him, something thoughtful. While his younger siblings played tag, Ethan stayed apart, half lost in his own world, half watching over them with a patient smile. One chilly evening, just as Claire was bringing groceries inside, she heard a soft knock. When she opened the door, Mrs. Miller stood there breathless. "Hi, Claire. I'm so sorry to bother you. You're the editor, right? The one who works from home?" Claire nodded, a little surprised. "It's about Ethan," Mrs. Miller continued. "He's been struggling with English, essays, grammar, all that. He's bright, but he's overthinking everything. Would you mind helping him out? Maybe an hour or 2 a week?" Claire hesitated. She hadn't tutored in years. Her life didn't have room for teenage energy or late-night assignments. But the look on Mrs. Miller's face, half desperate, half hopeful, made her nod before she could talk herself out of it. "Sure," she said softly. "I can help." That Saturday afternoon, Ethan came over for the first time. He stood at her door with a notebook clutched to his chest and said, "Mom said I should thank you before I even sit down." His voice was gentle, polite. Claire smiled, motioning for him to come in. "Let's make a deal," she said. "You thank me when you start liking English." He laughed, a quiet, uncertain laugh, but it lit up the room in a way Claire hadn't felt in years. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wooden surface. His first assignment was a personal essay about change. His draft was rough, scattered thoughts, long sentences, half-finished ideas. Claire read it slowly, then looked up. "You write like you're afraid of being understood," she said. Ethan blinked, puzzled. "Is that bad?" "No," she said softly. "It's honest." From that moment, something shifted. Their sessions weren't just about grammar or structure. They became conversations. About stories, fears, growing up. He'd tell her about school, about how he felt invisible in a crowd. She'd tell him about her college days, about chasing deadlines and losing dreams somewhere along the way. The words came easy between them, comfortable and real. Every week, Ethan seemed to open up a little more. His eyes held a kind of quiet curiosity that made Claire forget how many years stood between them. He'd ask her what she was reading, or why she kept so many plants, or what made her move to Maple Street in the first place. One day, as they went through a short story, he said suddenly, "You talk about books like they're people you used to love." Claire froze for a second, caught off guard by the truth in his words. "Maybe I do," she said finally. He smiled, that half-smile she was starting to know too well. "Then maybe that's why you make words sound alive." The sentence hung between them, quiet but powerful. Claire tried to laugh it off, but the warmth in his voice stayed with her long after he left. Their meetings continued, every Wednesday and Saturday evening. It became routine but never dull. Sometimes they worked in silence, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock filling the room. Other times they talked for hours, forgetting the essay entirely. Claire found herself looking forward to those moments, the knock on the door, the sound of his chair scraping across the floor, the way his eyes lit up when he finally understood something. It was simple, harmless, yet strangely comforting. But one evening, as the sky darkened outside and the room glowed with lamplight, something felt different. Ethan was distracted, his usual focus replaced by quiet restlessness. "Long day?" Claire asked. He nodded. "Yeah, school's complicated. Friends?" she asked gently. "Not really," he said, shrugging. People think too loud. I like it better here, she smiled. You mean quiet? He looked up, his gaze steady. I mean with you. The air shifted, just a fraction, but enough for Claire to feel it. She tried to look away, to focus on the open notebook between them. But her heart betrayed her with a single, rapid beat. Ethan didn't notice. He went back to writing, his pen moving slowly across the paper. Claire watched him for a moment longer than she should have, then stood to pour herself some coffee just to break the silence. When she turned, he was watching her. You know, he said softly, you don't smile much unless you're talking about stories. She raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He nodded. Yeah, but when you do, it feels like you remember who you are. Claire didn't know what to say. It was strange hearing such words from someone so young, but they carried a sincerity she couldn't ignore. She tried to brush it off with humor. You're observant. That'll help with your essays, but he didn't smile back. He just said quietly, I pay attention to things that matter. That night, after he left, Claire sat by the window like always, coffee growing cold beside her. Outside, the Miller house was full of light and laughter. Through the window, she could see Ethan helping his little sister with her bike, smiling, normal, like any other boy his age, and yet she couldn't shake the echo of his words. You don't smile much unless you're talking about stories. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was just admiration, a boy's innocent respect for someone older. But the truth was harder to ignore. The next session, she tried to keep things strictly academic. No side conversations, no lingering glances. They analyzed poetry, broke down structure, and stayed focused. But the more she tried to keep distance, the more she noticed him. His small gestures, his quiet concentration, the way he listened as if every word mattered. As the session ended, Ethan closed his notebook and said, I never liked writing before, but when you explain it, it doesn't feel like school. It feels like... Breathing, Claire froze again. He didn't mean anything wrong. He didn't even realize how his words sounded. But she did. She stood up, trying to keep her tone light. Well, if I'm making you breathe better, I must be doing my job, he grinned. Yeah, you're good at that. After he left, Claire locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Her mind was spinning. He was just a teenager, a kind, intelligent kid who needed help. That was all. That had to be all. But somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. Not love. Not attraction, just an ache she couldn't name. A reminder of something she'd buried long ago. The part of her that used to feel, to dream, to care. For years she'd been numb, surviving on routine and quiet comfort. Now, a 17-year-old's earnest smile had cracked that stillness wide open. That night, she opened her old journals, pages she hadn't touched since her 20s. They were full of dreams, unfinished poems, and ideas she'd never pursued. She read for hours, her eyes burning with both nostalgia and confusion. The next morning, as she walked to her mailbox, she saw Ethan again, standing by the fence, waving shyly before heading to school. He looked normal, carefree, unaware of the storm he'd unknowingly stirred inside her. She waved back, pretending nothing had changed. But as the wind carried the faint sound of his laughter, Claire realized something she didn't want to admit. She was beginning to feel alive again, and that terrified her more than anything. And as the first autumn leaf drifted onto her porch, she couldn't help but wonder, what if this was the beginning of something she couldn't control? When did helping become something more? The next few weeks passed in a blur of coffee cups, notebooks, and the steady rhythm of conversation that filled Claire's once silent house. What began as a simple tutoring arrangement now felt like something she looked forward to, something that added color to her otherwise gray evenings. Ethan had changed too. He was more confident now, his essays smoother, his thoughts sharper, but it wasn't just his writing that grew. His eyes held a certain depth lately, something that made Claire uneasy in ways she couldn't quite explain. Every Wednesday, he'd show up right on time, knocking twice like always. But now there was a warmth in the air between them, quiet but undeniable. He'd bring her small things, a new notebook, a cup of her favorite coffee from the corner cafe. sometimes even a flower he picked on his walk. He always brushed it off like it was nothing, but Claire noticed every detail. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Ethan seemed unusually quiet. Claire looked up from his essay. "You're distracted," she said gently. He hesitated. "Just thinking." "About what?" He gave a small smile. "About how some people make everything feel easier. Like the world slows down when they talk." Claire's heart skipped. "That's poetic," she said carefully. He laughed, embarrassed. "You're rubbing off on me." They went back to his essay, but neither could really focus. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was charged, alive, full of unspoken thoughts. As he packed up his bag to leave, he paused at the door. "You ever think about how people meet for no reason, but sometimes it changes everything?" Claire blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, pretending to smile. "Never mind. See you Saturday." The door clicked shut, leaving Claire staring at it for a long time, her chest tight with emotion she didn't dare name. What happens when feelings start to cross lines? Saturday came too soon. Claire told herself to stay calm, to treat it like any other tutoring day. She even rehearsed how casually she'd talk, how professional she'd sound. But when Ethan walked in, smiling with that easy warmth, all her careful plans fell apart. He smelled faintly of rain and soap, his hair still damp from outside. "Sorry, it's pouring," he said, brushing water from his sleeves. "Sit down before you catch a cold," Claire said, trying not to sound flustered. He grinned. "You sound like my mom." "Good. Maybe you'll listen to me then." He laughed, and the sound filled the room, bright, familiar, too comforting. They started reading an essay about dreams and identity, but halfway through, Ethan leaned back and asked, "Do you ever feel like you stopped dreaming?" The question caught her off guard. "What makes you say that?" He looked at her, serious now. "You talk about books, about stories, but never about your own life. You help everyone else write theirs, but what about yours, Claire?" She froze. No one had ever asked her that. Not even her friends, long gone from her circle. "I guess," she said softly. "I stopped waiting for it to change." He frowned. "But that's not living," she smiled sadly. "It's surviving. And sometimes that's enough." He looked at her then with something like sadness, or maybe admiration. "You deserve more than surviving." Those words settled deep inside her, staying long after he left. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, every smile. It was wrong to feel this way. She knew it. But emotions had a way of ignoring logic. She told herself it was nothing. Just connection, just kindness, just care. But by the next Wednesday, denial wasn't enough. Can you control what your heart begins to crave? That evening, Claire found herself watching the clock again. When Ethan finally arrived, she felt that familiar rush, the one she kept pretending didn't exist. He was in a good mood, excited about his grades improving. "You won't believe it," he said, waving his report card. "An A in English. My teacher said my essay felt real." "That's your doing, Claire." She smiled, genuinely proud. "No, that's you. I just helped you see what was already there." He sat down, still smiling. "You're the only one who ever made me believe I could do something right." Claire felt her throat tighten. "Don't say that, Ethan. You have a lot of people who believe in you." "Maybe," he said softly. "But you're the one who makes it matter." The silence that followed was thick. She looked down at her hands, unsure what to do with them. His gaze lingered too long, his words too sincere. She needed to break it. "Let's, get started," she said quickly. He nodded, though neither of them opened a book. For a few minutes, the only sound was the hum of rain outside. Then quietly, Ethan said, "Claire, do you ever feel like some people come into your life to wake something up in you?" She looked up slowly. "What are you trying to say?" He met her eyes. "I just feel like I wasn't supposed to meet you, but I'm glad I did." Her pulse quickened. "Ethan, you shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "It's true. Because," she said firmly, "some truths can be misunderstood. He didn't argue, but the look in his eyes said everything. That night, after he left, Claire sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly. She was angry, and not at him but at herself. She was the adult. She should have set boundaries, but instead she'd let the lines blur. The house felt emptier than ever. Every sound, every shadow seemed to echo with the absence of his presence, and deep down, she knew this couldn't go on forever. What if stepping away hurts more than staying close? The next session, Claire told herself she'd create distance. No small talk, no personal stories, just teaching. But when Ethan arrived, smiling as always, the plan dissolved instantly. He noticed something in her tone, though, the formality, the sudden coolness. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. "No," she said too quickly. "I just think we should keep things focused on school. You've improved a lot. Maybe you won't even need tutoring soon." Ethan looked at her confused. "You're trying to stop this, aren't you?" "Ethan, you are." His voice trembled, but not with anger. "Why?" "Because," she said softly, "it's better that way." He laughed under his breath, hurt flashing across his face. "Better for who?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. He leaned forward slightly. "You keep saying I'm just a kid, but you don't look at me like I'm one." Claire's breath caught. "You need to leave," she whispered, but he didn't move. His eyes searched hers, desperate, confused, hopeful. "You feel it too, don't you?" Her heart raced. "Ethan, please." "I do," he said, voice low but certain. "Every time I'm here, it feels like home. Like I finally belong somewhere." She stood trembling, her voice breaking. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Then make me understand." Her silence was the answer he didn't want, but already knew. He nodded slowly, stepped back, and whispered, "Okay." When the door closed, Claire sank into the nearest chair, tears stinging her eyes. The line had been crossed, not by action but by feeling. A feeling that shouldn't exist, but did. She didn't know what to do. End the lessons? Ignore it? Pretend it never happened? None of it felt right. For the next few days she avoided him. No texts, no lessons. She told herself she was protecting him, and herself. But each day without that knock on the door felt heavier, lonelier. And then one evening, as she walked home from the store, she saw him, sitting alone at the park bench, hood pulled up, staring at the ground. Her heart twisted. Before she could think, she walked over. "You shouldn't be out here this late." He looked up, surprised but calm. "I thought maybe you didn't want to see me again." "I never said that. You didn't have to." They stood there, under the dim streetlight, rain misting the air. He finally said, "I didn't mean to make things weird, I just said what I felt." "I know," she whispered. "But some feelings can't go anywhere, Ethan." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Then tell me you don't feel it too." Her lips parted. The words hovered, ready to escape, ready to deny. But none came out. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread, heavy with everything unsaid. She looked away, blinking back tears. He smiled sadly, the kind of smile that breaks you more than tears ever could. "That's what I thought." He turned to leave, his footsteps fading into the quiet night. Claire stood there, motionless, watching him disappear into the mist. Her heart screamed to call him back, but her mind wouldn't let her. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "This has to end." But as the wind brushed past, carrying the faint echo of his voice, "Tell me you don't feel it too," she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. And somewhere deep inside, Claire feared that the real storm hadn't even begun. What do you do when silence says what words can't? Claire hadn't seen Ethan in almost 2 weeks. The house felt different now, colder, quieter, as if the walls themselves noticed his absence. Every sound reminded her of him, the creak of the chair he used, the tap of his pen against the table, even the soft echo of laughter she didn't realize she'd missed until it was gone. She told herself it was for the best. She'd made the right choice, but right choices didn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes they felt hollow. The Miller family still waved from their porch every morning, cheerful as ever. Claire waved back, pretending everything was normal. But her eyes always drifted toward their eldest son, who no longer looked her way. He kept his head down, earbuds in, walking straight to the car. Every time she felt a strange ache she didn't have a name for. Then, one evening, as she was returning from the grocery store, she saw him again, sitting alone on his porch steps, notebook in hand, rain just beginning to fall. She hesitated, debating whether to walk over or stay away. But before she could decide, he looked up and met her eyes. Neither of them moved. The world seemed to hold its breath for that one heavy moment. Finally, she crossed the short distance between their houses and said softly, "Ethan, we need to talk." He looked up, his voice low. "About what?" "You stopped coming." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "You made it clear you didn't want me to." "I never said that. You didn't have to." They stood there, rain starting to fall harder, drops splashing against the steps. Claire sighed, brushing wet hair from her face. "This isn't easy, Ethan, what you said. It made things complicated." He closed his notebook and met her eyes. "Complicated for you. For me, it was just the truth." Her heart squeezed. "You're young. You'll understand later. I understand now," he interrupted. "I know what I feel." She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "And what is it that you think you feel?" He didn't hesitate. "You make me feel seen, like I matter, like I'm not invisible." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to tell him it wasn't real, that what he was feeling was just attachment, admiration. But she couldn't say it, because deep down, she knew she had felt something too. Still, she forced herself to step back. "You matter, Ethan, but not like that. You need to live your life. Meet people your age, make mistakes, learn from them." He gave a bitter smile. "You talk like you're already done living." That stung more than it should have. Before she could answer, his mother's voice called from inside, breaking the moment. "Ethan, dinner!" He looked at Claire, eyes soft but sad. "Good night." "Good night," she whispered, though she knew neither of them would sleep easy that night. What if the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget? Days turned into weeks again. Claire tried to fill her evenings with work, books, and music, but none of it worked. Everything reminded her of those tutoring nights. The smell of cocoa, the scratch of pen on paper, the way his voice softened when he read aloud. One afternoon, while sorting through some papers, she found one of Ethan's old essays, the one about change. His handwriting was messy, emotional, full of heart. The last line made her pause. "Sometimes change doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to wake you up." She sat there, staring at the words until her vision blurred. Maybe that's what he'd done, woken her up. Later that week, she went for a walk around the park near her house. It was late, nearly sunset. The sky was painted in soft gold and gray. As she turned a corner, she froze. Ethan was there, sitting on a bench, sketching something in his notebook. He looked up and smiled faintly. "You're avoiding the park now, too?" She sighed but smiled back. "You think I plan my routes based on you?" "Maybe," he said with a playful smirk. For a moment, it felt like old times. Easy, warm, simple. They sat down side by side, silence stretching comfortably between them. After a few minutes, she asked, "What are you drawing?" He turned the notebook toward her. It was a simple sketch of the street where they lived. Her house, his porch, the trees lining the sidewalk. But what caught her breath was the small figure sitting by the window, her, with a book in her hands. She blinked. "You drew me?" He shrugged. "You're part of the picture." Her voice came out barely a whisper. "Ethan," he closed the notebook and said quietly, "I'm not trying to make things weird. I just wanted you to know you changed something in me. Before you, I didn't even know who I wanted to be. Now I think I do." Her chest tightened. "You don't need me for that." "Maybe not," he said. "But you were the start." The simplicity of his words broke her. She felt the sting of tears she didn't want to show. "You should go home. It's getting late." He nodded slowly, stood and said softly, "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I just wanted to thank you." As he walked away, She felt a strange mix of relief and loss. Relief that he understood, and loss because he truly did. When she got home, the streetlights were flickering on. From her window, she saw the Miller's house, glowing, warm, alive. For the first time in months, she felt like an outsider again. Can distance erase what was never spoken? The next morning, Claire found an envelope under her door. It was addressed in Ethan's handwriting. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a short note. Claire, thank you for everything. You taught me more than English. I got accepted into an early college writing program. I leave next week. I didn't want to go without saying goodbye properly. I'll never forget you. She sat down on the floor, reading it over and over until the words blurred. He was leaving. That evening, she went outside and saw his car parked in the driveway, boxes being loaded in the trunk. Mrs. Miller was busy giving instructions, while Ethan carried a bag to the car. He saw her and stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he walked over, hands in his pockets. I didn't think you'd come, he said quietly. I wasn't sure I should. He gave a small laugh. You're still overthinking everything. She smiled sadly. Old habit. They stood there, the cool wind rustling the trees, neighbors passing by without noticing the silent goodbye happening between them. I read your note, she said finally. Congratulations, Ethan. I'm proud of you. Thank you, he said softly. I meant every word I wrote. I know you did. He hesitated, then asked, Can I ask you one last thing? Of course. He looked at her with that same steady, searching gaze, the one that had once seen straight through her. If I was older, if things were different, would it have mattered? The question struck her like lightning. She wanted to answer honestly, but honesty could break them both. So she whispered, It doesn't matter. Ethan, because what we had, whatever it was, it already mattered. For a second, he just stood there, eyes glistening. Then he nodded, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. That's enough for me. He turned and walked back toward the car. She watched as he climbed in, as the Millers drove away, as the taillights disappeared down the street. And then she stood there alone, the quiet settling around her like a heavy blanket. What if goodbye isn't really the end? Days passed. Weeks. The neighborhood grew quiet again, the way it used to be. Claire tried to return to her old routines, work, coffee, silence, but everything reminded her of him. His laughter lingered in corners, his voice in her mind. One late evening, she sat by her window, scrolling through her emails. Buried among them was one new message. The sender's name made her heart stutter. Ethan Miller. The subject line read, My first college essay, thought you'd want to see. She hesitated, then clicked it open. It was titled, The Person Who Changed My Story. As she read, her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about longing. It was about gratitude, about finding light in unexpected places, about learning to see beauty in broken things. The final line read, Some people don't stay forever. They stay just long enough to show you who you could be. Claire closed the laptop and smiled through her tears. Maybe he was right. Maybe some stories weren't meant to last. They were meant to awaken. Outside, a soft wind brushed against her window, carrying the faint scent of rain. The same scent that once filled the air when a boy with kind eyes knocked on her door for the first time. She whispered to the night, Good luck, Ethan. But even as she said it, a quiet part of her wondered if fate was really done with their story. Because sometimes, the hardest goodbyes are the ones that don't feel final at all. What if the person you tried to forget comes back when your heart has finally healed? It had been almost a year since Ethan left. Life had slowly settled back into its calm, familiar pattern. The mornings were quiet again. The evenings were filled with books and work. Claire told herself she was content, that she had learned to let go. But sometimes, when rain brushed against her window, or the scent of cocoa drifted from a cafe nearby, she still felt a soft ache, like a memory whispering her name. She hadn't heard from Ethan since that email. No calls, no letters. And that was fine. That was how life was supposed to go. People moved on, stories ended, and hearts learned to live with silence. She believed that, or at least tried to. One Saturday morning, as she was watering her plants, Mrs. Miller called from next door. "Claire, guess who's back for a few days?" Claire's hands froze midair. Mrs. Miller grinned. "Ethan, he's home from college. Only for the week, though. You should come say hi." Her heart stuttered. She forced a polite smile. "That's wonderful," she said lightly, pretending not to care. But all day, she couldn't focus. Every sound from next door made her pulse quicken. The laughter, the footsteps, the muffled voice she knew too well. She kept reminding herself that time had passed. He was older now, more grown, more distant. Whatever had existed between them belonged to another life. Still that evening, as she stood by her window, she saw him. Taller, leaner, his once boyish face now more defined. He was helping his mother carry groceries, laughing at something his little sister said. He looked happy. And yet, when he glanced toward her window and their eyes met for a fleeting second, that familiar warmth, that same unspoken understanding, came rushing back. Can you ever really go back to being strangers? The next day, Claire was walking home from the bookstore when she heard footsteps behind her. "You still buy too many books," said a familiar voice. She turned. Ethan stood there, smiling. "Older, yes, but still him." "I could say the same about you and notebooks," she said, unable to stop the small smile tugging at her lips. He laughed. "Fair. So are you going to pretend you didn't see me yesterday?" She looked down. "I wasn't sure if I should." "You should have," he said softly. "I missed talking to you." They walked together toward their houses, talking about simple things. His college life, her editing work, the neighborhood that hadn't changed. It felt surprisingly natural, like time had folded in on itself and brought them back to that kitchen table, laughing over essays and metaphors. At her doorstep, he hesitated. "Do you still make that terrible instant coffee?" She laughed. "Worse than before." "Good," he said, grinning. "Then maybe I'll stop by tomorrow." And he did. The next day, Ethan came over, carrying 2 cups from the cafe instead. They sat at the same table where they'd once studied. But now, everything felt different. The air wasn't charged with confusion anymore. It was calm, mature, unspokenly warm. "So," she said, sipping her drink, "how's college treating you?" "Busy," he replied, "but good. I'm writing a lot. I joined the campus magazine." "I'm proud of you," she said sincerely. He smiled. "You're the reason I started writing in the first place." She shook her head. "No, Ethan, you found your voice. I just showed you it was there." He looked at her for a long moment, quiet and thoughtful. "Maybe. But I still think you're the reason I learned to listen to myself." There was a silence. Soft, comfortable, but heavy with memory. Claire looked away, pretending to rearrange her mug. "You've grown up," she said finally. He smiled. "So have you," but she hadn't, not really. She was still the same woman who sat by the window each night, wondering what could have been. What if the heart remembers, even when time moves on? Over the next few days, Ethan stopped by often. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they just sat quietly, listening to music or watching the rain. It was innocent, yet layered with something deeper. A connection that hadn't faded, only matured. One afternoon, while sorting through old folders, Claire found something that made her heart stop. The essay Ethan had written years ago. The one about change. She smiled faintly, remembering his uncertain handwriting and the way his eyes had lit up when she told him it was good. When Ethan arrived later that evening, she handed it to him. "Look what I found." He read the first few lines, then laughed softly. "I was so dramatic." "You were honest," she corrected. "There's a difference." He looked at her, eyes gentle. "You kept this all this time?" She shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I keep all my students' best work." "Was I really your best?" He asked quietly. She froze, caught in his gaze. "You were memorable." He smiled at that. though his eyes said more than words ever could. They sat in silence for a while until he said softly, "You ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Her heart thudded. "Ethan, I'm not saying anything crazy," he interrupted quickly. "Just if we'd met later, when I wasn't 17, when it wouldn't have been wrong." Claire's throat went dry. She didn't answer. He smiled faintly, eyes sad now. "You don't have to say it. I already know." She reached across the table, her hand brushing his briefly. "Some people meet at the wrong time," she whispered. "That doesn't make it meaningless." He nodded, his voice quiet. "Maybe that's what makes it matter more." And just like that, the silence between them felt full again. Of all the words they could never say. Can a goodbye ever feel like hope? The week went by faster than either of them wanted. On his last night home, Ethan came by again, one last visit before returning to school. The air outside was cool, the sky streaked with orange and blue. He handed her a small envelope. "It's nothing big," he said. "Just something I wanted you to have." Inside was a short story he'd written, printed neatly, stapled at the corner. The title read The Window at Maple Street. She read the first few lines aloud. "There was once a woman who taught a boy how to find meaning in silence. She didn't know it, but she saved him." Her voice trembled as she looked up. "Ethan," he smiled softly. "It's just a story." "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes glistening. He shrugged. "I learned from the best." They stood there, watching the sky fade into dusk. Finally, he said quietly, "This feels like another goodbye." Claire nodded. "It is, but maybe not forever." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll hold you to that." He stepped forward then, not too close, not too far, and said, "You once told me words could change lives. You were right. Yours changed mine." Before she could respond, he turned to leave, walking down the path, each step echoing like the closing line of a story she didn't want to end. She stood there long after he disappeared into the night, the story still in her hands, her heart both heavy and light at once. But what if some stories are meant to find their way back? Weeks later, Claire received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, steady, deliberate. "Dear Claire," it read, "you once told me that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means letting go. I think I finally understand. But maybe letting go doesn't mean disappearing. Maybe it means growing until you can return without the weight of what if. I'm not there yet, but one day I will be. Until then, thank you for everything." She folded the letter gently, smiling through tears. Outside, the rain had begun again. Soft, steady, familiar. Claire opened her window, breathing in the cool air, and for the first time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt alive. She whispered into the wind, "You'll find your way back, Ethan." But deep down, she knew. This wasn't really an ending. It was just another pause, because some connections don't fade. They wait. And sometimes the people we try to forget are the very ones life plans to return. When both hearts are finally ready. And as lightning flickered far away, Claire smiled softly to herself, unaware that one day soon, a letter would arrive that would change everything again.